1937 Berlin. In a testing ground outside the German capital, a vehicle that seems utterly unremarkable rolls forward across rough terrain, climbing slopes that would bog down wheeled trucks, fording small streams with mechanical indifference, moving with a precision that suggests it belongs nowhere on a battlefield. The mechanics and engineers watching are silent. At the Military Automotive Department, officers from the Weapons Bureau examine the results with expressions suggesting disappointment. The design submitted by Hanomag, the industrial company known primarily for producing locomotives and commercial tractors, does not impress them. It is too simple, they believe. The sloped armor, borrowed from an earlier prototype, seems unrefined. The open-top design suggests a lack of sophistication, a compromise born from manufacturing limitations rather than tactical brilliance. The machine gun mounting appears crude, the troop compartment too cramped, the overall vehicle somehow too utilitarian, too democratic in its lack of luxury and excessive engineering. The officers shake their heads. This design, they decide, will not serve as the template for Germany's mechanized infantry doctrine. It will not represent the aesthetic of German military excellence or the philosophical sophistication expected from the Wehrmacht. The vehicle is rejected, deemed unsuitable for the grand vision of panzer-grenadier warfare that German military theorists are developing. A disappointed Hanomag engineering team returns home to Hanover. No one at that moment understands that they have just witnessed the rejection of what will become the most iconic and the most feared armored personnel carrier of World War II. A vehicle that will be produced in quantities exceeding 15,000 units. A vehicle whose design decisions made in that moment of rejection will shape the nature of mechanized warfare for decades to come. The history of the Sd.Kfz 251, the famous Hanomag Halftrack that would come to symbolize German mechanized infantry, begins long before 1937, rooted in decades of German experimentation with half-tracked vehicles. Ernst Kniepkamp, a brilliant engineer working in the Military Automotive Department before the Nazi regime came to power, had spent years studying the problem of cross-country mobility for military vehicles. The fundamental challenge confronting all modern armies is how to transport troops over terrain where wheeled vehicles bog down and become immobilized. Half-tracked vehicles combining the steering advantages of wheels in front with the traction advantages of tracks in rear seem to offer a solution superior to both fully tracked vehicles and fully wheeled vehicles. Germany, through the 1920s and 1930s, pursued a systematic program of developing half-tracked vehicles in multiple weight classes, from light reconnaissance vehicles to heavy artillery tractors. Kniepkamp's designs established the philosophical foundation for all these vehicles. Robust chassis, practical construction, efficient use of materials, mechanical simplicity that prioritizes function over elegance. The designs were then turned over to commercial manufacturers, Borgward, Hanomag, Daimler-Benz, for further development and production. By 1938, German military planners recognized a new requirement: the need for an armored personnel carrier that would allow infantry to keep pace with mechanized divisions equipped with panzer tanks. The concept of panzer grenadiers, motorized infantry capable of operating alongside tanks and entering battle mounted in armored vehicles, was revolutionary for its time. No other army had attempted to develop dedicated armored personnel carriers. The requirement specified that the vehicle must carry a full squad of 10 men plus crew, provide protection against small arms fire and artillery shrapnel, mount machine guns for suppressive fire, and retain enough mobility to operate with tank formations. Hanomag, having successfully produced the Sd.Kfz 11 half-tracked artillery tractor, was the natural choice to develop an armored version. Hanomag took the proven Sd.Kfz 11 chassis, lengthened it slightly, and designed an armored hull around it. The hull design, rather than being original to Hanomag, was adapted from an earlier prototype used on an experimental gun carriage. The sloped armor was a practical solution to the problem of protecting against projectiles while minimizing weight. Projectiles striking sloped armor must travel through more material than they would through vertical armor, improving protection while keeping the vehicle light enough to maintain mobility. The design submitted to the testing board in 1937 represented a fundamentally pragmatic approach to the problem. The open-top design, which military theorists criticized as unsophisticated, actually provided multiple tactical advantages. Troops could observe the terrain while dismounting, could throw grenades and fire over the protection of the hull, could exit the vehicle rapidly if necessary, and the design simplified manufacturing by eliminating a roof that would be difficult to armor effectively without adding excessive weight. The sloped armor plates, instead of being milled or formed from complex curved shapes, were simple flat plates that could be manufactured by any competent machine shop. The armor thickness, 14.5 millimeters in front, 8 millimeters on the sides, provided adequate protection against standard rifle ammunition and shrapnel while keeping weight manageable. The engine, borrowed from existing Hanomag tractor production, was proven, reliable, and could be maintained by mechanics trained on civilian vehicles. The transmission was similarly practical, a 4-speed box taken from commercial vehicles, simple and robust rather than sophisticated. But in 1937, this pragmatic approach was not what the German military wanted to see. Military Automotive Department officers, influenced by the romantic vision of Germanic technical superiority and by the belief that German design should represent cutting-edge sophistication, were disappointed. They wanted something more advanced, more representative of German engineering excellence. They wanted a design that announced itself as superior through obvious technical sophistication. Instead, Hanomag had designed what looked like a militarized tractor, because fundamentally it was. The rejection meant Hanomag would not receive the primary contract for producing an armored personnel carrier. Instead, the contract went to other manufacturers pursuing more ambitious designs. The years 1937 through 1939 saw various proposals and prototypes tested, each one attempting to incorporate more sophisticated features, more advanced design concepts, more evidence of cutting-edge engineering. But all these designs shared a fatal flaw. They were overcomplicated. They required custom components, specialized machine tools, and manufacturing processes that could not be easily replicated across multiple factories. They suffered from mechanical troubles in testing. They were expensive to produce and difficult to maintain. By 1939, as Germany prepared for war, practical necessity began to override aesthetic preferences. The German military suddenly needed armored personnel carriers in quantity, and it needed them immediately. The sophisticated designs that had been pursued since 1937 were nowhere near production ready. Germany could not afford to wait for perfect designs to be developed. Hanomag's rejected design, meanwhile, had been refined through continued development, tested extensively, proven reliable in field conditions, and was ready for immediate production. Military necessity overrode artistic preference. In spring 1939, Hanomag received authorization to produce the Sd.Kfz 251, the vehicle that had been rejected 2 years earlier as insufficiently advanced. The first production vehicles rolled off the assembly line that summer. They were designated as SPW, Schützenpanzerwagen, or armored infantry vehicles in German military nomenclature. Among troops, they were often called Hanomags after the manufacturer, though German officers preferred the more formal designation. The rejected design, born of pragmatism rather than ambition, was about to change mechanized warfare forever. The transformation from experimental prototype to mass-produced weapon system was not instantaneous. In 1939 and early 1940, production was slow. The basic production model, retrospectively designated Ausführung A, was built in limited numbers, accumulating experience as workers learned the manufacturing process and engineers identified problems requiring solution. Only in 1941, as Germany mobilized fully for war on the Eastern Front, did production accelerate dramatically. Once the design proved itself in combat and Hanomag solved initial manufacturing problems, production ramped up to levels that would eventually see 15,000 vehicles and variants, produced by 7 different manufacturers working simultaneously across German-occupied Europe. The rejected design had become the standard. The pragmatic solution that had seemed insufficiently advanced in peacetime proved to be exactly right for industrial warfare. The Sd.Kfz 251's emergence as Germany's primary armored personnel carrier fundamentally transformed the nature of mechanized infantry tactics. The vehicle's most distinctive feature, the open top, initially seemed like a disadvantage to theorists trained to believe that more armor was always better. But the open top provided advantages that closed designs could not match. Panzer grenadiers could mount and dismount rapidly, could navigate terrain without visibility restrictions, could fight from the vehicle while remaining under armor protection, could respond instantly to tactical changes without the delay required to exit a fully enclosed compartment. The design's simplicity made it superior in ways that went beyond mere functionality. Because the HANA-MAG was simple, it was reliable. Because it was reliable, units could count on vehicles being operational when needed. Because manufacturing was straightforward, 7 different companies could produce it, and the parts were sufficiently standardized that vehicles produced in different factories were interchangeable. Damaged vehicles could be repaired using parts from other vehicles. Mechanics without advanced training could maintain the vehicle effectively. The Sd.Kfz 251's combat effectiveness was amplified by the tactical doctrine developed for its use. Panzer Grenadier companies operating alongside panzer divisions would receive missions that wheeled infantry could not accomplish. The 251s would approach across terrain that would bog down trucks, would ford streams and negotiate rough ground at speeds comparable to tanks, would deliver assault infantry to points where tactical surprise could be achieved, would provide direct firepower through their MG-34 or MG-42 machine guns, while troops dismounted and assaulted fortified positions. The vehicle was never intended to fight tanks. It was intended to ensure that infantry could keep pace with tanks and could maintain offensive momentum across difficult terrain. In this role, it was nearly perfect. A squad of 10 Panzer Grenadiers mounted in a 251 could travel 50 kilometers in a day across terrain where marching troops would require days. They could arrive at a tactical location fresh enough to fight immediately. They could retreat rapidly if counterattacked, mounting back into their vehicles while engaging pursuing forces with machine gun fire. The open-top design allowed soldiers to fight from inside the vehicle, using its armor as cover while continuing to participate in battle if the vehicle needed to slow or stop during an engagement. The Sd.Kfz 251 evolved through multiple variants over its production life, each one adapted to different tactical requirements. The basic troop transport version carried 10 Panzer Grenadiers and proved suitable for its primary role. But the design proved so versatile that it was adapted for roles far beyond its original conception. The Sd.Kfz 251-9 mounted a short-barreled 75mm gun, serving as an assault gun providing direct fire support to infantry attacks. The Sd.Kfz 251-16 mounted a flamethrower, delivering incendiary fire at point-blank range against fortified positions. The Sd.Kfz 251-17 mounted a 20mm anti-aircraft gun, allowing the vehicle to engage enemy aircraft while remaining mobile. The Sd.Kfz 251-20 mounted a 30mm anti-aircraft gun. Other variants carried smoke generators, mortars, anti-tank guns, and reconnaissance equipment. The chassis proved strong enough to accommodate all these modifications without significant redesign, a testament to the fundamental soundness of HANA-MAG's original pragmatic design. Over 20 variants were produced, each one addressing a different tactical requirement. This versatility, the ability to adapt a basic platform to multiple purposes, became one of the vehicle's defining characteristics and a major factor in its combat effectiveness. Where other nations required different vehicles for different roles, Germany could modify the HANA-MAG's basic platform to accomplish multiple missions. The early combat effectiveness of the Sd.Kfz 251 became apparent during the invasion of Poland in September 1939 and the invasion of France in May 1940. Panzer Grenadier units equipped with HANA-MAGs proved capable of executing rapid assaults across broken terrain and maintaining momentum with advancing tank formations in ways that mounted rifle companies using trucks could not. The vehicle's ability to negotiate rough ground while providing armor protection gave their occupants tactical advantages over both dismounted infantry and troops mounted in trucks. By the time the invasion of the Soviet Union began in June 1941, the 251 had demonstrated its combat value sufficiently that production was accelerated dramatically. German commanders requested additional vehicles. Army depots requested additional variants. The rejected design had not only been vindicated, it had become indispensable to German military operations. The Sd.Kfz 251's true test came on the vast spaces of the Eastern Front, where terrain was broken and weather conditions extreme. The Soviet Union's landscape, deep mud alternating with frozen ground, endless distances between supply points, climate conditions that could kill unprepared troops in hours, challenged every aspect of German motorized operations. Wheeled trucks designed for roads often became immobilized in mud or snow. Even tanks sometimes struggled with the terrain and weather of Russia. The 251s, with their half-track design combining wheels and tracks, proved surprisingly capable of operating in conditions where other vehicles failed. Reports from frontline units consistently praised the Hanomag's reliability and off-road performance. A 251 that became bogged down in mud could often extricate itself by deploying additional traction that wheeled vehicles lacked. A 251's tracks could maintain traction in snow that would defeat tank designs optimized for open terrain. The vehicle became known as exceptionally reliable in difficult conditions. A workhorse, according to one divisional commander. The best transport we have, according to another. Letters home from Panzer Grenadiers often mentioned the Hanomag's capabilities with admiration, tinged with relief. The vehicle carried them into battle and, more importantly, carried them back out when it was time to retreat. The Sd.Kfz 251's vulnerability to anti-tank weapons and its light armor were never concealed from soldiers who operated it. Nor were these vulnerabilities unknown to designers. The armor thickness of 8 to 14 millimeters provided adequate protection against small arms ammunition and artillery shrapnel, but offered no protection against anti-tank rifles or anti-tank guns firing armor-piercing projectiles. Soldiers understood that if serious anti-tank fire began, their best hope was rapid movement to escape the field of fire. The vehicle's speed, capable of 30 kilometers per hour on good roads and significantly less on rough terrain, meant that escape was not always possible. Losses were frequent whenever 251s encountered concentrated anti-tank fire. Units that suffered such losses reported heavy casualties. However, the alternative to armored transport was not unarmored transport. It was dismounted attack, which historically resulted in even higher casualties against defended positions. An unarmored truck provided no protection. An armored 251 provided some protection, which was better than none even if not adequate against dedicated anti-tank weapons. By 1944, the Sd.Kfz's 251 had become so established in German military operations that it was present in virtually every theater and every operation. In Normandy, 251s carried Panzer Grenadier assault squads during the German counterattack toward Mortain. In the Ardennes offensive in December 1944, 251s transported assault pioneers and support troops during the initial breakthrough attempts. In Hungary, in the final desperate counterattacks against Soviet forces, 251s were still being committed despite overwhelming odds against them. In every operation, they proved their reliability and their tactical utility, even as the overall situation deteriorated, and German operations shifted from offense to desperate defense. Surviving photographs from throughout the war show 251s in every conceivable condition: mud-covered in Russia, snow-laden in Hungary, dust-covered in North Africa where comparatively few saw service. The vehicle's iconic shape became synonymous with German mechanized warfare in the same way that Panzer tanks had become symbols of German armored strength. The rejected design's ultimate vindication came not in victory but in how thoroughly it had proven its superiority over all competing designs. After the war, when victorious nations analyzed German military vehicles to understand what had worked and why, the Sd.Kfz 251 appeared in virtually every analysis of effective military vehicles. The Soviet Union, examining captured 251s, incorporated design lessons learned from the Hanomag into development of their own armored personnel carriers. The United States, reviewing German vehicles as part of post-war military intelligence analysis, recognized the fundamental soundness of the design. Other nations that emerged from the war, developing their own armored personnel carriers and mechanized infantry doctrine, often borrowed design elements from the 251. The vehicle's influence persisted long after the war ended, with design principles evident in armored personnel carriers developed throughout the 1950s and beyond. The design decisions Hanomag engineers had made: sloped armor for better protection and ease of manufacture, open top for rapid egress and situational awareness, modular design allowing variance, simplicity prioritized over sophistication, became the template for modern armored personnel carrier design. The pragmatism that had caused military theorists to reject the design in 1937 proved to be its greatest strength. The officers who wanted something more advanced, something that more obviously announced German technical superiority, wanted a vehicle designed for peacetime demonstrations and military parades. Hanomag had designed a vehicle for war. The engineers understood that reliability mattered more than sophistication, that manufacturing ease mattered more than cutting-edge features, that mechanical simplicity was superior to complex systems that could fail when subjected to combat conditions and field maintenance. The designers had internalized the lessons of World War I, where vehicles that were technically advanced but mechanically fragile often failed when subjected to mud, weather, and poor maintenance. They understood that in war, the best vehicle is not the most advanced vehicle, but the vehicle that starts every morning and keeps running despite poor treatment and inadequate maintenance. The scale of production, eventually achieved for the Sd.Kfz 251, demonstrates how completely the initial rejection had been overcome. Hanomag alone produced over 7,000 vehicles at their Hanover factory. Other manufacturers, Demag, Büsing-Nag, Kleckner, Humboldt-Deutz, Kraston, Stuer, and Fuchs, produced thousands more. Factories in occupied France, Poland, Czechoslovakia, and other territories under German control contributed to production. The total reached approximately 15,200 vehicles and variants during the war, making the 251 one of the most produced German armored vehicles. For perspective, Germany produced only around 6,000 Panzer IV tanks, the most numerous German tank of the war. Germany produced approximately 5,000 Tiger and Panther tanks combined, yet it produced 15,000 Sd.Kfz 251 half-tracks. The volume of production reflected the fundamental importance of the vehicle to German military operations. The mechanical reliability of the Sd.Kfz 251 became legendary among soldiers who operated it. In environments where other vehicles suffered catastrophic failures, the Hanomag kept functioning. Mechanics reported that the basic systems were robust and simple enough that repairs could be made in the field with limited tools. The Maybach HL42 engine, which powered later versions, was proven and reliable in civilian applications and proved equally reliable in military use. The transmission and transfer case were straightforward mechanical systems without the complexities that characterized some German military vehicles. The suspension, based on the earlier Sd.Kfz 11 design, had been refined through thousands of service hours and proven capable of handling the stresses imposed by combat operations. Soldiers understood that their 251 was far more likely to be operational after days of use than many other German vehicles. This reliability translated directly into tactical effectiveness. Units that could count on their vehicles being functional could plan more ambitious operations, could maintain momentum through difficult terrain, could accomplish tasks that would have been impossible if vehicles failed frequently. The Sd.Kfz 251's performance in various theaters and climates demonstrated the robustness of the original design. In North Africa, where American and British forces encountered 251s for the first time in significant numbers, the vehicles proved capable of operating in harsh desert conditions where maintenance was difficult and spare parts were scarce. Reports from captured German officers indicated that the vehicles were less reliable in the intense heat and sand of the desert than they were in temperate climates, but they were more reliable than wheeled vehicles operating under the same conditions. On the Eastern Front, where winter temperatures dropped below -30 degrees Celsius, the 251 proved superior to many wheeled vehicles in starting and running in extreme cold. The mechanical simplicity that allowed the engine to be modified for winter operation and the robust battery systems meant that vehicles could often be started even after exposure to extreme cold. In Hungary and Austria, during the final months of the war, 251s operated in mountainous terrain where their half-track design provided advantages over fully wheeled vehicles, struggling on steep slopes and narrow roads. Across all these different environments and operational theaters, the design proved fundamentally sound. The transformation of the Sd.Kfz 251 from a rejected prototype into Germany's most numerous armored personnel carrier illustrates a fundamental truth about engineering and warfare. The best design is not always the most technically sophisticated design, but rather the design that best solves the actual problem that needs solving. The rejected design solved the problem of creating a vehicle that could transport troops, provide armor protection, maintain mobility across difficult terrain, be produced in quantity, be maintained in the field, and be adapted for multiple purposes. It solved these problems through simplicity and pragmatism, rather than through advanced technology or cutting-edge innovation. Subsequent events validated this approach completely. The vehicles that competed with the 251 for military contracts, the designs that impressed military theorists with their sophistication and advanced features, were forgotten by history or produced only in tiny numbers. The rejected design, vindicated through combat effectiveness and proven reliability, was produced in tens of thousands and became the foundation for an entire class of military vehicles that remained in service for decades after the war epilogue. The last Sd.Kfz 251 rolled off assembly lines in 1945 as Germany faced total defeat and its industrial capacity collapsed. Thousands of vehicles had been destroyed in combat, captured by advancing Soviet and American forces, or simply abandoned as German units retreated across collapsing fronts. Yet the design lived on. Captured vehicles were studied intensively by every major power. Design principles evident in the 251 influenced the development of armored personnel carriers by the Soviet Union, the United States, Great Britain, and nations that emerged newly independent after the war. The M113 armored personnel carrier, eventually produced in tens of thousands and becoming the most numerous armored vehicle in the world, incorporated design principles evident in the Hanomag. Virtually every armored personnel carrier design developed after World War II bore the imprint of lessons learned from studying the Sd.Kfz 251. The mechanics' rejected design, pragmatic and simple, became a revolution in military vehicle design, influencing military doctrine and vehicle development for generations. The 15,000 vehicles produced during the war were eventually all destroyed, scrapped, or lost to time. But the ideas embodied in their design, that mechanical simplicity was superior to complexity, that reliable function mattered more than impressive features, that vehicles should be designed for the conditions in which they would actually operate, rather than the conditions theorists imagined, that manufacturing ease and field maintenance capability should be design priorities, lived on in every armored vehicle developed after the war. The rejected Halftrack became the most influential German military vehicle ever produced, influencing military engineering and doctrine across the entire post-war world, a triumph of pragmatism over ambition that changed warfare forever.